Hello, this is Catherine Harris. Salmon, the Sacred, an Essential Indigenous Cultural Tradition. This is an informative on the meaningful importance of salmon to the indigenous community. It will include details on traditions like the first food ceremony and the threat that climate change is having on the salmon populations and the ecosystems around it. I will also speak about the people who are working to change this, like the Nez Perce tribe, and how they are facing these challenges head-on with different fishery methods and a desperate attempt to save the fish that save the tribes. The salmon has been a staple in indigenous culture for hundreds of years. History says that a tribal member would consume almost a pound of salmon each day. The story of the salmon. Tribal legend states that the Creator, in preparation for bringing humans to the earth, called out to all creatures and asked for a gift to help these new people to survive. The salmon was the first to come forward to offer itself as food to feed the people. Water was the second to offer its bounty to hydrate the people. Fishing for salmon is an essential characteristic of indigenous culture and is as important as consuming it. Salmon is also a uniting component for Native peoples across the world. In many Indian traditional beliefs, specific animals and creatures are considered persons who have a special spiritual connection with Native peoples. Salmon is an indicator species. As water deteriorates, the fish population declines, as will the elk, deer, roots and berries, and remedies that support indigenous livelihood. Salmon has been a primary food source for thousands of years and is key to the growth in tribal populations. Therefore, the needs for salmon are more important than ever. For Northwest tribes, for example, Columbia Basin salmon play a crucial role in the ecosystem of the region by returning nutrients to rivers and streams that they were born. Historically, salmon has been a thriving economy for Native peoples. The rivers where indigenous people get their salmon are seen as sacred and as part of their sense of place. They believe it is their responsibility to protect the salmon from harm. Salmon is essential to many tribes' diets as a way for them to stay connected to their culture and to maintain a healthy heart. The first food ceremony is a traditional indigenous ritual that marks the arrival of the salmon run, and the leftover carcass is returned to the water to give thanks and to give hope to a prosperous return of the salmon population. The ceremony starts with the blessing on and the drinking of the water, then prayer, followed by the serving of the salmon. Almost all tribal ceremonies, celebrations, funerals, and other special significant events include salmon. Food sovereignty is extremely important to indigenous tribes to determine the quality and quantity of the food that they consume. Currently, reduced flow of streams and warmer temperatures are causing declines in salmon. This graph to the left shows the increase in water temperature in Washington state. Food sovereignty empowers Native communities and addresses hunger issues. It also assists in tribes to create their healthy, fresh foods. Native Americans and Alaska Natives are much more likely to experience food vulnerability than other racial and ethnic groups in the United States. Many times in Native communities, tribes will host harvest and berry festivals. They will teach salmon filleting and demonstrate sheep and elk processing. They will also teach cultural sovereignty classes. The building of dams for hydroelectric power has had a detrimental impact on many tribes, including the Nez Perce people. Water levels changed, and this affected the landscapes and therefore blocked the salmon migration, especially the smolts, which are young salmon. The building of the Dallas Dam ultimately destroyed Celilo Falls, which were falls and rapids along the Columbia River, which was a culturally important site to the Nez Perce. The protection of American Indian sacred geography is essential to preserving the integrity of Native American spiritual and religious practices. Many sacred sites seek protection under the National Historic Preservation Act. The use of dams are also contributing to the peril of salmon. Dams change the ways that the rivers function and tend to interfere with the life cycles of salmon and other animals. Dams are barriers to young salmon migrating to the ocean and a hurdle as an adult fish to return to streams and spawn. Chemicals that come from dams can reduce salmon growth and increase disease in fish and wildlife. The Nez Perce tribe opened a fisheries department and a department of natural resources to help conservation and the management of tribes' fish and wildlife resources. Today, many tribes are encouraging tribal youth to help put an enormous effort into the fight to save the salmon. Every year, more and more tribe members are becoming environmental engineers, scientists, and fish biologists. Multiple dams on the Snake River and Columbia Rivers have led to huge declines in salmon. The environmental stresses and the stress of traveling through the dams is fatal to many salmon. Habitat pressures such as agriculture and construction, linear development like adding power lines, forestry, and climate change impacts all have direct effects on the number of salmon to return. Salmon are tagged in fisheries and scanned as they go through the dams, and these pressure indicators are used to give scientists and tribes the vital information needed to determine the specific causes of habitat degradation. Indigenous knowledge of salmon is much needed and often is not given the voice or seat at the table that it deserves. This is changing through organizations such as the Northwest Indian Fisheries Commission and the First Nations Development Institute. These organizations work toward tribal sovereignty and encourage tribes to take lead decision-making roles in fisheries and environmental teams that have a say in what can be done to protect and restore the salmon population. There have been many important legal cases that have affected Native American rights. The Bolt decision is one that is commonly referred to as one of the most significant cases when dealing with tribal fishery rights. Although the decision dealt with fishery rights, it is its affirmation of tribal sovereignty that signifies an important victory for Native Americans. This case is the United States versus State of Washington, and Judge George Bolt, pictured left, gave the decision in 1974 that required that the state of Washington uphold its treaties with the Native Americans by honoring the tribe's treaty rights to half the catch with the tribes and the state to manage the fishery together. Billy Frank Jr., pictured right, a Nisqually tribal member elder, advocated for fishery rights in the 1960s and 1970s and was arrested many times for trying to assert his native fishing rights. Salmon is essential to the survival of indigenous culture. It plays a part in spiritual and tribal religion. It is part of the indigenous identity. The sacred salmon is vital to future indigenous generations, and everything must be done to protect its existence. Thank you for viewing this presentation today on Salmon the Sacred, an essential indigenous cultural tradition.